brush on overhanging.
Hello.
Glasses or no glasses? Okay, glasses.
Everyone ready?
Are they dark? No, right? Yes, hello everybody.
Hello. Good morning.
Yes, it's you'll share a little bit more. I was just thinking before I wanted to share about Joseph Wolf. I did a sort of passion project on Joseph Wolf just for my own, just because it was so interesting. I did something, but before I wanted to share about that, I was just thinking as I was listening to Jeff's talk, how Satan can use health to make us misconstrue the things that we share with each other. And particularly this fight or flight response thing. And I was thinking that just like in the political realm, at least in America, we have two political parties with this oppositional format. And I was a very strong Democrat. All my family was we're all Democrats. We were liberals. If somebody came to me and said, "Oh, you're a Democrat? I'm a Republican. I'm a Republican. You're a Democrat?" Right away, you go into sympathetic dominance, as I learned. You go into this war mode. You don't know each other. All you know is that he's a Republican, I'm a Democrat. You get in this war mode, and you can't discuss anything. It could be whatever he says, I will misconstrue. And I was just thinking that how Satan does those things to us that makes it really difficult for us to share, especially the gospel. You know, it can be challenging. Many things that we share are very challenging. So it naturally, when people hear it, the fight or flight comes up, and then it becomes very difficult to share anything. And I was just thinking, how can we avoid this? How can we get into a place where people, and we know that once people get into this fight or flight, they can't really think properly. It's just all adrenaline, and so I think that's really important that we are able to make a safe place to discuss and to be able to share things. And that's where the sort of non-condemning, non-judgmental thing comes in. Because of our own judgment system, this thing where every sin, or you can say everything that you do wrong must be punished, it makes it very difficult for us to accept that we're wrong in anything. Because if we're wrong in anything, it means that we are foolish, and it means that we deserve punishment, actually. So, for example, it would be very difficult for me to accept that in the past, let's say even simple things like the food that I've ate my whole life to be unhealthy. Just that, if somebody were to tell me that, because my justice system says that I can't accept that, because I can't forgive myself, and that means that I was stupid, and so just even simple things like the food people eat and the habits they have, just to change those things and to be able to share things like, hey, white rice isn't so good, you should eat brown rice. Bam! Right away people are like, what? And so you can imagine things like, hey, you tell somebody that, you're not saved. Imagine just the stakes involved there. It really get people worked up. And so I just think that we really have to be so careful. And I was thinking one of my favorite verses when I first became a Christian really touched me. I didn't really understand it, and I didn't really even believe it. But was when Jesus says, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest." And we need to be in an atmosphere of rest, including the other person, the person who's not Christian. He needs to be in an atmosphere of safety and rest, that he can hear these things and be able to be like, oh, yeah, maybe, yeah, cool, And I think the key thing that makes that rest possible is the next part of the verse. Because it's easy to say I have Christ and I can do all things in Christ. I can do all things in Christ. Yeah, I can share. And sometimes we think that that's what God wants us to do. He wants, I gotta tell everybody. And but it's the wrong spirit, it's the wrong attitude. And actually, Jesus says what the right attitude is in the next verse. You need to learn of me, learn of Jesus, because he's meek and lowly in heart. And if we are meek and lowly in heart, if we give off that sort of atmosphere, we're going to have much more success. I was telling some people that in Thailand, because of this whole controversy and such a sensitive issue regarding vegetarianism in the church, it's really important for me to be as non-condemning and happy a vegetarian as possible. Because if I come across, even if I don't mean to, I have to be very aware, if I come across as somehow, even if I misconstrue that somehow I'm better than you for being vegetarian, they get really upset, especially the youth. And they're like, and then they'll be like, I don't want to talk, I don't want to see that guy. Me. So I have to really, because the issue is more than just health. The issue is that people don't really think it's possible to do. They can kind of know that, okay, it's healthy, but I can't do it. It's too hard. So we need to give off this atmosphere that it's not hard. It's not hard. And I'm not judging you. It's okay. And I'm happy. I'm just doing my thing. And I like it. It's not a big deal. And then they can feel like, oh, yeah, maybe it's not as hard as
I think habits might be just hard to change.
Yes. Habits are super hard to change. And we rationalize our habits that, people say things like, that's just who I am. I just have a hot temper. That's who I am. I can't change it. And we need to have this atmosphere where people feel like they can change. So that's just what I was thinking. And I was just thinking about our health and how if people are in bad health, if they have sort of anxiety and these things, it makes it very difficult to share. And so one of the first things to do is if we can help people with their health. And so I really liked, in Thailand, actually, the massage therapists are actually called doctors. And they actually work as kind of therapists because we don't have psychologists in Thailand. So people will go to the massage therapist and they kind of get some work done, and they will really express all of their difficulties and pains to the massage because it's very intimate. It's like an hour long. And as I've noticed, the massage therapist is usually just doesn't really give advice, just kind of, oh yeah. And just lets them kind of, yeah. And so sometimes that's what we need to do, and I think I think that oftentimes we think we know what they need, and of course everybody needs Jesus, but sometimes we need to listen to see what. There's so many things to share. We have to listen and have wisdom from the Spirit to know what thing they need at this particular time. Yeah. We'll just bless them, and not the thing that we think that they need. So.
Maybe put Jeff's tape on our mouth at night and in the daytime. For some of us, anyway.
If that works for you.
I definitely need to do. I have jaw issues, so Jeff spoke to me. So
It's an occupational hazard for me. So.
So I just want to start with that. I want to pray. Yeah. Father in heaven, we just thank you for how kind and loving you are and how you teach us, and there's always more things to learn, and we could always do your will better, but I also know that you don't judge us and for things we've done in the past, but you want us to be happy in doing your work, and so that requires more knowledge and more wisdom. That's what we ask for, Father. Please forgive us for the things that we've done that have pushed people away from you, and just use us in the future so that we can be a blessing, particularly a blessing to others. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So the reason I thought of Joseph Wolf, I have a deep passion for missionary work. Thailand, the country I live, there's probably a few places this is true, but it's called the missionary graveyard, even for Sunday Christians, because you have Sunday Christians, very good speakers, evangelists. They will go to countries like India, even China, have a lot of success, come to Thailand, preach, people will listen, but just no results, no fruit. And you can take that two ways. It can be easy to be frustrated and think that just Thai people they just don't like Jesus, or they're just uneducated, they just don't get it. That could be one way to look at it. But I tend to think of it that God allows nations to exist, nations and religions. If there was no hope for them, they would already have vanished. If there was nothing good in that religion at all, I believe it would have just vanished. There used to be thousands of religions. They're all gone, So I can just give examples of this. Like Hinduism has vegetarianism. it wasn't for the Hindus, vegetarianism could have vanished from the earth. Maybe. Muslims have a sort of respect for law and a creation. Buddhists have sort of nonviolence. So there's different aspects that I believe that God allows, because if it was too easy to convert everybody, we wouldn't need to draw closer to God. We wouldn't need to pray more. We wouldn't need to study our Bibles more and think, what's the problem? And I tend to think that, looking at it in a positive way, that if what we're doing is not working, it means that we don't understand the gospel well enough. We need to think more. We need to have more wisdom. And then it will work, because all people need Christ, and all people want to be blessed, and all people want to go to heaven. So that's how I've looked at it. And I've been trying to think, what can we do to be more successful in sharing to different people groups, particularly difficult groups. And so I was thinking about the Adventist Church and most of the history of the pioneers generally in America, among Christians. So that's sort of the experience we draw upon. Ellen White, in all her writings, I think she mentions, I don't think she's ever mentioned, she might mention Hinduism once. I don't think she's ever mentioned Islam in all her writings. So it doesn't, if you were to read Ellen White and be like, oh, what do I do with Islam? You wouldn't find many answers. At least direct, explicit answers. There's things that you could kind of imply. And so I was just thinking how, and the pioneers themselves worked in the Sunday Christian culture, mostly in America too, or in Australia, or in Europe. And so I was just reading The Great Controversy, and I just thought it very interesting that there's only one missionary mentioned in The Great Controversy, and that's Joseph Wolf. There are reformers mentioned, in England, Calvin is mentioned, the Waldenses are mentioned, but in terms of the chapter on William Miller, there's only one missionary. In the great golden age of missions, which is post-French Revolution, that's really the great missionaries. I mean, these people were really special. They were able to create languages, like written scripts. They would go to countries for 40 years, work all day, just so dedicated. They would take, example would be the Karen people. Those missionaries went there, learned the language, it was already difficult, took their language and made a script for their language, then translated the Bible, and then taught the people that script that they invented so that they could read the Bible, and then taught the Bible. I mean, what a process. It almost seems, actually, I was talking to my father about this, and even my father said, it almost seems impossible. And my father, who's atheist, agnostic, he said, yeah, it's just because my father knows how difficult. He's been in Thailand 30 years, and still his Thai is not, it's still iffy, So he knows how, in a sense, almost miraculous that is. That whole process is, and these missionaries did that with many, many languages, at least, and very, very difficult work and very dedicated. This was really the golden age. But, there's William Carey in India, there's Adoniram Judson in Myanmar. I mean, many famous missionaries she could have mentioned, but she doesn't. She mentions only one, Joseph Wolf. So I just thought, who is this man? Because there's not much information. His Wikipedia page is very, very short compared to a lot of other missionaries. And I think that's because he was not really associated with the denomination. So if you are associated with the denomination, like if you're Baptist, Baptists who lived later on would write sort of hagiographies, books about you, because you're a heroic Baptist, and we want to remember our old denominational forefathers, right? But Joseph Wolf didn't really have a denomination, so there's nobody after he was very famous in his time. His books were widely read. Ellen White mentioned that he spoke to Congress in America. So he was very, 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 very famous. But once he died, he kind of faded away, just like many people from the 1800s. We kind of lost track of in our time. So I just thought, who is this man, and why is he special? Why is he different? And does he have any clues to having success in missionary work? So Joseph Wolf, I would suggest reading that chapter about him, but he was a Jew. He was a very strict, his parents were very strict Jews. and he grew up in Germany. He was a German Jew, and he heard, I guess the thing that he heard a sermon or something saying that basically he made the connection that the Jews killed many prophets. They killed many prophets, and so could it be possible that Jesus was a prophet and they killed him too? Because that's what they did to all the other prophets. He kind of made this connection. And I think he read Isaiah 53, and in his journals, Isaiah 53 is huge. I mean, he shares it everywhere. There's actually, as he travels in the Muslim countries, they ask him over and over again, share us something from the Bible. Share us a sermon that Jesus preached. And over and over again, he goes to Matthew 5. He shares that, Matthew 5. And to the Jews, he always shares Isaiah 53. That's the big thing that he always does. But so he becomes very zealous for Jesus. He's convinced that all the problems the Jews have is because we rejected the Messiah. He becomes very serious and he's a very young man. I think when he converted, just like 14, maybe something 15, runs away from home because his dad didn't accept it. He goes around surviving by teaching Hebrew to he's excellent linguistic skill, so he would teach Hebrew to rich Christians, or the children of rich Christians, and that's how he survived. And he would go from place to place, and he would listen to different Christian scholars, and it's interesting because he was unimpressed with the Protestants in Germany, actually, at that time, because he felt that that was a big age of higher criticism, and he hated higher criticism. He didn't like how the Protestants were picking apart the Bible, and so he actually kind of becomes attracted to Catholicism, and before I get there, because so I actually started my book with his time in Rome, and it's very interesting what happens to Wolf in Rome as he's studying to become a priest. But so there's a few things. I just have a few notes here. He's the only missionary in the Great Controversy. He wants to take the message to the whole world. So he has a very, in a good way, universalist perspective. He's not focused just on one people. It's also clear that to do this takes preparation. He didn't just go. Right? He had to study first, and I just thought it was very interesting to compare his description of the Jews at his time to Adventists. Actually, the Jews were very insular. Not much from outside entered into their own culture. When he converted, he was kind of cast out from other Jews. So they had sort of a creedal system, and they also come across as self-righteous, oftentimes arrogant. And I thought interesting is that often the Jews in his time, and also in Jesus' time, cared very little about other cultures and religions and worldviews, because we're the best. We already know everything, and a lot of I feel, and I think sadly feel, that a lot of Adventists don't really know much about other cultures or religions. Not all, but there's a sort of underlying feeling that we don't need to learn. We don't need to know anything about other cultures because we have the truth. And I think that there's a maybe this comes from, they think that seems to be what they think that the pioneers didn't focus on other cultures because they didn't write about it. But what I thought was very fascinating is that Ellen White cites 3 of Joseph Wolf's books in the Great Controversy. And these are massive books. And in these books, Joseph Wolf explains in detail Hinduism, Islam. I just thought to myself, if Ellen White read these books, her knowledge of Islam is extensive, because, especially for her time, because that's a time when Hinduism is very exotic and obscure, and Wolf is really writing in detail. So these people were not ignorant of other religions. They just chose not to take I guess you could say a negative theology approach and say Hinduism is wrong because of this. Like they didn't want to go that direction. But doesn't mean that she didn't know what Hinduism taught. And I thought that was very interesting because these books are enormous and very detailed and offering a lot more about Hinduism than most people know nowadays. Even some scholars, Hindu scholars. And also they're very experiential because Wolf talks to many Hindus and he describes his discussions with them. So the pioneers knew more than we tend to think. And I also want to say that in the past, in Wolf's time, there probably were very few Hindus in all of Europe, or Muslims even, maybe one in a big city doing business. So you would probably go your whole life in Germany not meeting a Hindu or a Muslim. But nowadays, people living next door to us are Hindus and Muslims, and we can complain all we want about our government's immigration policies, which I don't think is useful because Christ's kingdom is not the kingdoms of this world. So I don't think we should really care about the governments do what the governments do. I don't think we should really worry. But I do think that in a sense, God has allowed this to happen, that we have opportunities to share. And if you share to one Muslim person in Australia, the way they're very tribal and very family-oriented, it spreads very quickly. And it can easily spread from that one person in Australia back to his own home country. That's just how it works. And so I think that God, instead of looking at these things sort of negatively, we try to think things in terms of how Jesus would look at it. And he would want to take it as a gospel opportunity rather than, of course, these things are going to cause problems in the future. But I'm just trying to think there's going to be massive problems in the future. And instead of trying to worry too much about what governments are doing, we want to think about how to get the message out to the world. And one more thing I thought was really interesting is that most missionaries I meet, at least, actually I want to quote this, is that they tend to think that they already understand the Bible, and they have a legalistic view of what it takes to make a Gentile or a heathen saved. So they spend a lot of time studying, sales techniques almost, and they think that they already know the gospel, and they just want a Thai person to say, "Yes, I accept Christ as my personal savior." Yes, got him. Right? And then, of course, I'm exaggerating a bit, but then they bring him into church, and then they try to make him fit in the church. But the point that I thought was, when these converts actually start to question things, question doctrines, the usual answer is that, shut up, basically. Don't ask too many questions. This is how it is. And so the converts are like, "Oh, okay, you're the teacher, I guess. You're the expert. And I'll just I just want to go to heaven, so I'll just be quiet, I guess, Or they leave, right? So, but it makes it very difficult for those converts to tell their friends, and so oftentimes it causes separation. They have to become Christian. They have to separate because they can't really explain it to their friends, and and usually they have experience praying, and so they love God, but they have many questions that aren't answered. And so Christianity is very much a living thing. He's always learning new things from the Bible. In a sense, he's very cutting edge. He's very avant-garde. He's very almost experimental. He's pushing the limits of Christianity. He's not bound by a creed. Whereas many other missionaries, they are bound by it. It's very sad. I went to a Baptist Sunday church right before I came, and I was looking at their sort of beliefs, and they really don't want to believe in hell. I can just see it. They don't want to teach it. They're trying to describe it as, he said, hell is separation from God. Right? So they're trying to really explain it in a way that doesn't revolve around torment or burning or anything, but they're still trapped by the creed, their own Southern Baptist creed. They can't really escape it. And that causes, when you're trapped by a creed, you can't really think. You can't really think outside the box. And that's sort of the freedom that Wolf has. He's always pushing the limits. British soldiers or different Protestant groups, they want him to talk to their congregations because he has such interesting adventures and stories. But he's always pushing the limits. They're like, Wolf, can you ease up on your prophetic interpretations? Because he himself believed that Jesus was coming in 1847. That's what he taught. From his understanding of Daniel and Revelation, I think because he believed in a 34 date for crucifixion. So he had a very similar understanding of the 2,300 years. He just didn't have the dates right. But he was preaching, at least in the book, his big missionary journeys started about 1830. So about 1830, he's preaching that 31 up until 1840 or so. He's preaching that Jesus will come in 1847.
Before William Miller started.
Before William Miller started,
So
yes.
he went through a disappointment too.
Yes, and it's actually really interesting because in his later books, his 1862 book, how he tries to reconcile his mistake. And he says, "Oh yeah, I was kind of foolish," because he has friends that tease him, because he was very powerful. Like there was a famous military commander who teased him. He said, "Oh, Wolf, trying to end the world before it's time, Wolf, the prophet of doom, And he's like, "Oh yeah, I don't really know, yeah." But I mostly try to focus on his journals pre-1847. So he trying to get what his mindset was like when he was really believing that doctrine. Because after 1847, he has to start to think what went wrong. And so his theology post and pre is different, which is actually true with a lot of the Adventist movement. Pre-1844, they believed one thing, but then because it didn't happen, they had to think of, and they went many different directions. And so, but I just want to make this point that I believe that if your Christianity is stale, if you're stuck into a creed and you can't get anything new out of the Bible, the people that you're trying to share to can see it, and they can see that it's dry, and they can see that you're just going through it's just dogma, it's just formalism, and then just from a gut perspective, they're not interested, because they can. It's just kind of your job. You're not actually passionate. It's not actually. Whereas Wolf, he's, I just learned this new thing and I gotta share, and people are like, wow, this is pretty cool. He's obviously like learning new things and he's really excited. And I think that's sort of the attitude that's where I know how much this sort of group has blessed me, because when I first came into Adventism, it's very exciting. Everything, I could listen to any sermon and think that this is so cool. Didn't matter who preached it, as long as there was just one thing that was, I remember saying, this is the first sermon I ever heard on Samson. This is the first sermon I ever heard on this and that, and everything is great. But after a while, it starts to fade away. I heard, this is the same idea again, and it starts to get stale. And when your religious experience is stale, it becomes very difficult to share, because people can feel it. They can feel it.
You give off a stale vibration.
Yeah, exactly. And there you go. And so I wanted to quote this from Ellen White, and she says that the light. This is from this book here.
Sufferings of Christ.
Sufferings of Christ. Yeah. The light and strength of one day to the Christian will not be sufficient for the trials and conflicts of the next. Satan is now constantly changing his temptations, as he did with Christ. Every day we may be placed in new positions and may have new and unexpected temptations. We may as consistently expect to be sustained on the morrow by the food eaten today, which we know we can't, as to depend on present light and present blessings for future strength. So we always need more light to be able to do more. Weak and sinful man cannot be safe unless God shall daily manifest his light and impart to him his strength. And she makes it even more clear in this next passage. It says the life of a living Christian is a life of living prayer. The path of the just shineth more and more unto the perfect day. The Christian's life is one of progression. So And she makes this clear that it's not just moral progression. It is moral progression and virtuous progression, but how does that work? Right? She says, he goes forward from strength to strength, from grace to grace, from glory to glory, receiving from heaven the light which Christ, at infinite cost himself, made it possible for man to obtain. And this is really important here. The Christian cannot let his light shine properly unless he receives an increase of the divine illumination corresponding with his growth in the knowledge of Bible truths. So this already shows that there needs to be more Bible truth. There's never a point where you're like, okay, I got it, that's Bible truth, and now I just have to teach it. There's always going to be progression in Bible truth, not only in our overcoming of sin, but the overcoming of sin is based on doctrine. It's based on understanding more and more doctrine, which is quite a difficult thing for people to accept because they feel like, I just need to share Jesus. So, well, yes, but you need to have... So once somebody rejects Bible truth, it becomes very difficult for them to share because they're not moving in the light. They're not being able to channel this sort of light to other people because they've rejected something. Yes.
It's like spiritual sustenance.
Yes.
Food for the soul.
Yeah. So anyways, that's what I wanted to say. I just thought it was very interesting because Wolf kind of epitomizes. He has this very zealous and very... Because he's a convert and because he's a Jew, I think also this has... One of the big things in our group, or since I've been following Adrian, is this looking at the Hebrew and doing William Miller's rules with the Hebrew and how that opened up things. And I guess that's sort of an advantage that Wolf had. He's just so excited. He's connecting the New Testament. He learned the Old Testament. And then he's like, when he becomes a Christian, he's like, oh, Paul, wow, he's connecting this and connecting that. So when he was preaching, it's always very interesting. It was always new things that people were hearing, right? So I do think that's really important. And so I just want to go through a few examples of what I thought was just the really cool highlights of his travels. The main trip he did, he went through Egypt to Israel to Syria to Iraq to Iran, up to Turkmenistan, into Uzbekistan, and then down through Pakistan, Kashmir, and to India, back to Yemen. That was the big trip I focused on. And particularly he was most excited about going to far eastern Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan. And these are places that no Christian had been in hundreds of years. Most of the people, Wolf was the first Christian they ever met. They would just look at him like he was a strange animal. And he also, and for most places he went, he was the first Jewish convert to Christianity that they'd ever met. For most Orientals, most Arabs, that region, in which there were many Jews, there were Jewish communities in all these cities, Baghdad, Tehran, Shiraz, Bukhara. No Jew had converted to Christianity in hundreds of years. They just unheard of. Because the religion had become very stale. The Christians had become very formalized, dogmatic. So are the Jews, and so are the Muslims. All of it was very... Not much was going on. Not much... People were not really studying that much of their own scriptures. And so when Wolf comes into town, things just start happening. It's just so cool to read. Because he's so... he just causes... It's interesting. He causes a revival even in Islam. Because he shares, and the Muslims are like, what? Is that really what our Quran says? I've got to go read them. And so all the Muslims just start talking to each other and saying, what does our Quran say about Jesus? And he actually causes revival among... I won't even say revival. He causes interest in religious matters wherever he went. I just thought that's really interesting. And I felt that sometimes maybe the role of a missionary is not just to share... Of course we want to share Jesus, but when you first share, you don't want to be so confrontational, right? We don't want to be... You just want to get people thinking about spiritual things, because most people don't. And most people repress spiritual things, and most people are scared about spiritual things. Because of this idea of God that's quite scary, they're scared, even Muslims, they're scared to read the Quran because they're scared to, I'm not smart enough to understand this, and if I read it and I don't understand it right, then God's going to be angry at me. It's this type of thinking, you know? And so, and when they see a wolf, they're like, wow, a Jew converted to Christianity. Huh. That means that I can also kind of do what I want. You know, I can also kind of, you know, he's doing his thing, and he's excited, and he's happy, and maybe I don't have to be scared about spiritual things. And maybe there is like blessing there. So I just want to say, so first he goes to Rome, and he's very young, and he's passionate, and he's just breathing fire. Everything that he learns that he doesn't like, he has the whole school against him. Like this is a good example. He says, they're talking about predestination, and he says, the teacher, the priest says, the question of predestination is a very difficult one. Therefore, you must neither take the scripture nor the fathers as your guide, but the infallible decision of the Roman pontiffs. Because it's too complicated, right? And he says that Pius V has declared in one of his bulls that if anyone should say that the opinion of Augustine is correct, they're anathema. So at least on this matter, Augustine is wrong. Right? So if anybody takes the position of Augustine and says that Augustine has the same authority as the decision of the popes, they shall be anathema. Right? Anathema, as in cursed, right? Cursed. And then Wolf just, what? You know, Wolf at once took fire and said before them all, do you believe the infallibility of the Pope? The professor said, yes. Wolf said, I do not. So this is in the class. And then he was at once surrounded by the whole college. And Bonelli, was especially indignant and exclaimed, bad and impious people seldom do believe the infallibility of the Pope. But if you want to stay at Rome, drive away these iniquitous thoughts. And then Wolf became furious. This is very interesting. This is, I like the spirit that Wolf has. This is him reflecting as an older man on his youth. Okay, so this is maybe 30 years later or 35 years later. He says, Wolf became furious, but has since confessed that he did not show the real spirit of Christianity in the opposition which he offered. Nay, he owns that it argued a great deal of vanity in himself as a young man to attempt to be a reformer. Very interesting he says this. He says, what would they have said in Cambridge, in England, the famous the theological school in Cambridge, if Wolf, during a lecture delivered by a religious professor, had got up and protested against the sentiments of the professor? Would he not have been stopped by the professor and the whole audience at once? So he's just saying it's disrespectful, just from a terms of headship and submission, and teacher-student, that he did not really... He had the right, of course, to think that, and he continued to think that all his life. He hated the doctrine of the infallibility of the Pope. But he's just saying that the way he shared it and the way that he interrupted the whole class, he just felt like... and that the way he was angry about it, that was not Christian. And he showed... This even goes deeper. He says that... this one is really deep. There's two more I want to show about this time in Rome. He said that the Pope, okay, so this is talking about Isaiah 7:14. I don't know if anybody studied this, where it says that a virgin shall be with child. How's the verse go?
Conceive.
Yeah. And many people say that word virgin should be made. It doesn't necessarily have to be virgin. That's what Richard Dawkins says. So that word, it's just Protestants. It's just the disciples translating that verse virgin to make it fit with Jesus. That's what they said. But actually it just means made. It has no connection to a messianic prophecy. That's what some people said. And so this is they're arguing this in Rome. And he says that, and the Pope says, so you see, the Pope's saying that, see, the Hebrews, some people say this, some people say that, right? So you can't go back to the Hebrew. In this case, the Pope must decide. Right? So, the Pope at last must decide everything, because who can know, right? And then it says here, this is so good. Everybody writes, Wolf replied with the most unpardonable sneer. How can the Pope decide if he does not even know Hebrew? Because Pope Wolf knew Hebrew. And then the guy says, Wolf, I'm afraid for you that you will become a heresiarch. Have you heard that? A founder of a heretic sect. And then a heresiarch, yeah. And then he says, although Wolf, and then the man comes to him and says, and then Wolf again, he's very self-aware. He says, Wolf at this moment believes that his reasoning was correct. Yet he was so much struck by the meekness of Cardinal Della that on returning to his room, he said to himself, Cardinal Della has after all shown a more Christian spirit than I have done, and burst into tears. Yeah, so even though this cardinal was wrong, the fact that the cardinal was so gentle in the way he told Wolf, I'm worried for you. That you're going to go off and do a weird, start your own sect. Just the way he was so gentle about that, Wolf, and Wolf was so rah, that he realized that this man, even though he's wrong, he has that more of a Christ spirit than me, and he actually cries. This is amazing. And this is the last one of his time. Oh, there's a few more. This is the last one in Rome. This is really deep. He says, Wolf answers frankly. He says, although he hopes that love for divine truth has been one of his ruling motives. I think that's true for all of us. We really, divine truth has been one of our motives for what we do, right? Yet his great enemy all through life has been vanity and ambition, cherished and encouraged alike by injudicious friends and covert foes. So people, he's saying Satan encouraged this vanity in him, basically. He owns that during his life at Rome, his vanity made him believe that he knew everything better than those by whom he was surrounded. And as other people told him that he was like Luther in outward appearance, he resolved, if possible, to be a Luther also in his stormy and wild career. This is really interesting. So he wants to be like Luther. But at the same time, his insatiable ambition made him wish and aim at becoming Pope. So he wanted to be like Luther and reform, but also he wanted to have power. He wanted to be a Pope. And he once openly avowed in the college that he was an admirer of Gregory VII. I can't remember who that is. And he said he wished to be like him in daring and firmness, but to do exactly the contrary to what he did, and to abolish celibacy and the worship of saints. So he wanted to be a pope so he could fix Christianity. He even told his this is amazing, he even told his other students that he intended to name himself Pope Hildebrandus I. Amazing. So he's only like 22 or 21 at this time. So so this is amazing, and I just thought, wow, and how true this is. We've talked about this in the past, how even though we can be Adventists, we can have this spirit of trying to want to control others or trying to reform others. That is the spirit of Antichrist still in us, this spirit of wanting to be a pope, thinking that things have to be like this, that the church has to be like this, everything has to be like this, and it's just not right. It's not the spirit we should have. And I just thought, wow, how... I guess he was still young, so he was so sort of innocent about it. But to actually say, I picked a name for myself, Hildebrand, is amazing. And then I want to continue. This is I just have a few quotes about his time with the Muslims. These are fascinating because he uses one main argument with the Muslims, and it's beautiful how he says some of these things. He says, this is one example. He says, Christ. Wolf is talking to he would talk to Muslim kings. These are not just random people. These are intellectuals. He would talk to the Sharia scholars, basically the Pharisees of the. These are people who knew their Quran, and they would have discussion. And Wolf himself, I'm not saying that we should know the Quran well, but I'm just saying that it's good to know a little bit, just to be able to. We don't seem like we're just. Ignorant, right? Exactly. And you're trying to convince me, and you don't know anything about what I believe. It just comes across sort of silly. Arrogant. Yeah, arrogant. So it says, Wolf says, Christ converted the world by persuasion. Okay, this is really interesting. Christ converted the world by persuasion, by the sublimity of his doctrine, by prophecies, and by miracles. Muhammad converted the nations by the sword. And this is interesting what the Muslims say back to him. He said, the Muslims say, there are two physicians. The one cures the sick by sweet medicine. He is a good physician. Other physicians give the sick bitter medicine, and they are cured. He is also a good physician. Whoa there. And then Wolf says, and then they continue. The Muslims continue. They say, Again, there are two generals. One takes the city by storm. He is a good general. The other takes the city by persuasion. He's also a good general. You see what they're saying? This is similar to what Rome teaches. We compel them in, force them in, because they need Christ.
Is it good if he takes a bit of herbs and he dies?
Yeah. Anyways, Wolf, this is what Wolf says. Wolf says, "The sword cannot be good medicine, for if it kills the enemy, he is prevented from being persuaded into the right faith. And if it frightens him into submitting against his belief, it makes a hypocrite of him." So if you're frightened into becoming, if you're scared, and then you become a Christian, you say, "Oh, I don't want to be a Christian because I don't want to burn." No. You have no character transformation, and you're a hypocrite. Yeah. And then this is a sort of a side doctrine, but usually the Muslims will say, because they are aware that they don't really have prophecies. That's sort of they're kind of like, how come they have prophecies but we don't? They kind of just like, but one of their big arguments is that the Quran is a miraculous book. They say those. I've heard this argument when I was in the Middle East many times, that the Quran itself is a miracle, for no one was ever able to write such beautiful Arabic. Right? I don't know if you've heard this. This is a common thing that Muslims say. And Wolf says, this cannot be proved, for it's a matter of taste. It's true. We can say the Bible is written beautifully, but it's a matter of taste. I can say I love Isaiah, and you can say you love Proverbs, whatever. Leviticus. Okay. Just a few more. They ask him, what objection do you have to Muhammad's doctrine? And Wolf answers, Muhammad did not act in conformity with God's actions, which are quite different to his. They ask, how do you know God's actions? Wolf, by his loving all mankind. The Muslims, how do you see that? Wolf, in his creation, look at the sun which comes from God, which shines upon the good and the bad, the Jew, the Christian, the Mohammedan, and the worshippers of fire, the Farsis. But Muhammad commands his followers not to love the Christian, who is yet the creature of God. And the Muslims say, good, very good. This is a different era than us. They have they're able to debate without... The Muslims could accept that his argument was legitimate and good without actually converting. They're like, good arguments.
Almost the other way.
Yeah, almost you persuade me. And there's many times where he would say things. I thought it was so funny. There was one time he meets a bunch of Jews and he's showing them the prophecies, and they're like, "Hey, we need to check the Talmud." And then Wolf goes, "The Talmud is a lie. The Talmud is a lie." I just thought, whoa! If you were to do that in our day, yeah. And then right afterward, Wolf says. And then they keep discussing, and Wolf says, "We had a delightful night of discussion." Thought, wow, that's a different era they had, where they could just talk more freely, I guess.
Robust. I
think also they allowed Wolf to say that because he was a Jew, and so freedom. If it was a Gentile who would say that, they wouldn't like that. So So Wolf is not. He's zealous, but he also has this wisdom. He knows how far he can push. Maybe he's still pretty young when he went on some of his journeys. But yeah, it took some time. At least I think that his experience in Rome was actually really good for him. And I thought that that's kind of an analogy for a lot of us, because a lot of us come into the church and we had this experience with Rome, which we kind of need to get over.
Well said.
I don't want to go. I thought, is there any more that are really, really cool? He talks about his testimony. People, he just comes across as really. There's also some very interesting things that most of the Jews, their reasoning for rejecting Wolf is actually, the big reason is the Trinity. So you worship you worship 3 gods. And actually, he meets one Jew who says, he actually quotes, I can't remember what verse, Deuteronomy 14, or where it says, if a prophet comes and he does miracles, but he teaches you to worship other gods than Jehovah, you must kill him. He says, that's why we killed Jesus. Because even though he did miracles, he wanted to take us and make us worship 3 gods. And that's why Jesus had to die. Because he wanted to teach 3 gods. Yeah, it's very profound actually when you think about it. And it was an old Jew, a Polish Jew, he was going on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And he says to Wolf, for thousands of years, Christians have been trying to convert us to their 3 gods, and we will not have it, basically. Just, wow, profound, you know? And that happened multiple times. What's interesting, though, I kept expecting a Jew to attack Wolf on the Sabbath, and it never happens. They usually go this 3 gods route. And it's not until... Yeah, he became a Sunday keeper. He became a Trinitarian too. But a Trinitarian in a very loose, flexible way, yeah. He's quite flexible in some things. But I think it's also because of oppositional. He met a lot of Unitarians that he just didn't like. Because the Unitarians were very loose. They would say things like Jesus, had no pre-existence and all people are going to heaven. He didn't like that. So, so he says that. So this is a classic example of what you might deal with a Muslim. They ask him, "Who was Jesus?" And then Wolf says, "The Son of God." And the Muslim says, "God has no wife." This is where this is how they understand it. And then Wolf says, he kind of has a difficult answer a little bit. He says, there are even among men different kinds of sons. A benevolent man who brings up an orphan, clothes and feeds him, becomes thus the father of the orphan, and the child becomes his son. We are all in a certain sense the sons of God, for he is our creator and preserver. Jesus Christ is the Son of God, for he was born, as your Quran itself states. Here's where he uses the Quran against them, because the Quran mentioned the virgin birth. The Quran states, by the power of the Holy Ghost. And as the Quran beautifully expresses it, God said, let it be, and it was. Jesus is called the Son of God, for the fullness of the Godhead was in him bodily. His spirit of wisdom and his spirit of might. We should consider those who might say that Jesus was the Son of God, like a son from a man and wife, to be an infidel. So he's making it very clear that, no, I don't believe that Jesus is the Son of God because of a man and wife. But I still think, in my reading of Wolf, that he could be more clear about the begottenness of Christ. And we know that doctrine, it took time for it to become more clear. And so I was reading this book, and I was waiting, who is going to ask him about the Sabbath? And it finally happens. And it's actually in Peshawar. Anybody know where that is? Yeah, in Pakistan, near the border with India. We arrived in Peshawar. Sardar Sultan Muhammad Khan received me in the kindest manner, gave me a room in his house, and ordered a tailor to make me a European dress at his own expense. In the evening, he introduced me to a great many mullahs, religious teachers of Peshawar, for the place is considered to be the most learned city in Islam after Bukhara. That's in Uzbekistan. One of the mullahs observed, as Christ had said that he came not to abolish the law, why then have the Christians changed the Sabbath day? Amazing. So and then Wolf goes, I replied that it was only commanded in the Bible to labor 6 days and to rest on a 7th day. And it was nowhere said in the scripture that the 7th day of the Jews was the 7th day of creation. That's how he dealt with that one. And he says, I must confess that I never expected such a question from a Muslim. So I just thought it was interesting. So people kind of know, and more than maybe we think that they know. So I was just hoping that to do this book and And I do believe that many of the things that Wolf deals with, I know that oftentimes we're scared to meet Muslims because we don't really know what they're going to say and how they're going to react. Their culture is very different. Their beliefs are different. But I was hoping that through writing this book, that a lot of this, I feel, I spent 6 months in Jordan. I had discussions with many Muslims. They love to talk about religion. Many of the discussions that Wolf has with these Muslims, I had, even now. The same type of arguments, the same type of things. So I was hoping that in writing this book, that it would make people feel prepared and not feel scared to talk to Muslims and be like, oh yeah, okay, that's where you're going. I remember reading that when, and also kind of understand how they think and just to feel that it's possible. Because in Wolf's time, the Europeans thought it was impossible for somebody to go and preach in some of the places that Wolf went. And Wolf's point is that no, it's not impossible. If you have the right spirit and the right attitude, they don't mind. They really don't mind. As long as you're not being offensive about it, or yeah. So yeah, maybe that's kind of.
And Danny, can also add that there is a surah that talks about Jesus.
Yes.
And then you can actually tell them to read that one, and they will read it.
Yes.
They'll do what you say, and then they're allowed to ask Jesus to speak to them.
Yeah. Yeah, the Quran does say that Jesus is born of the Virgin. It does say that Jesus is the Word of God. I think that's true. So there's things that you can build from there. So yeah, and it's amazing how many people, Hindus, Muslims, ask Wolf to pray for them. Many people pray for us, pray for us, pray for us. Read something to us, share something to us. So yeah, maybe are we one?
It sounds as though people then they were in some ways they weren't, but in some ways they were freer thinkers. They were searching for wisdom in some ways. You know, people like you were talking about yesterday. I mean, we've been trained what to think. You know, so people aren't necessarily searching for wisdom.
Wolf makes this point that among sort of the wilder people in Turkmenistan, these sort of nomads, he felt they're ripe for he says this, he says, the more I see of this country, the more I am convinced that there is not a more hopeful field for a missionary than Turkestan. It's Turkmenistan, Western Iran. The Persian likes to read the Bible and to converse about religion for the sake of curiosity. But the Turkomans in the desert, they're not reading anything. You know, they're desert people. With all their barbarity, and the people of Bokhara, with all their corruption, and the inhabitants of Balkh, this is Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, like to converse about religion and to hear of it from a genuine feeling for religion. So I think that sometimes these people that are we would consider more primitive, they're not bound by creeds. So they're able to kind of think more freely in a way, whereas other people, their pride or their education makes them sort of stuck and unable to break out of that. So yeah, that's I just thought that's very interesting. Many things that he shares and.
Danny, just from all those quotes there, it seems that Wolf was interested in teaching people but not converting people. Go ye therefore and teach all nations, and planting seeds rather than insisting people show immediate acceptance of it, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, and he had this. He kind of stumbled on this technique because if you were to go to a Muslim country and say, "I want to convert Muslims," they'd be, "What? Man, get out of our country." Yeah. But Wolf didn't say that. He said, "I come to your country to talk to my brethren, the Jews, and to share Jesus with the Jews." And the Muslims are like, "Huh? What are you going to share with them?" and then he would preach to them, but they didn't really realize they're being preached to. Very interesting. And so they're like, "That's interesting. Oh, the Jews believe that, and the Christians believe that. Okay." And so there's a lesson there maybe for us that we can kind of say things to Buddhists, and we can say like, let's say for example, because sometimes people take it the wrong way. If you say I'm a missionary, if you take that to a Buddhist, they're like, "Oh, you want to convert me, and that's your job. You're getting paid to convert me." But if you say something like, "Oh, you know, I'm a teacher. I want to share to other Christians that I want to share to other Christians that God is non-violent. Then a Muslim or a Buddhist is like, huh, what do you mean? Because all of a sudden, see, you're talking. Yeah, it's a very interesting thing because you're talking. They kind of want to have. It's more like they're eavesdropping on an internal Christian theological discussion that they're interested in, rather than you being like, your religion's wrong and you need to become Christian. But then they're like, oh, okay, it's just tactically, or it's just very interesting. So, like, for example, in one Muslim city, the Muslims allowed Wolf to put posters everywhere, all over the city, showing all the prophecies why Jesus is the Messiah for the Jews. But all the Muslims saw it. And all the Muslims were like, oh, those are prophecies for Jesus, isn't it? And many Muslims are like, huh, can I have a Bible? Because I want to, what's going on, you know? Many people. They wouldn't say like, I want to become Christian, but many people ask Wolf that, can I get a Bible? Can you read something in the Bible? So it's just, he's planting seeds and he's getting people interested in it without necessarily making them feel on the defensive, which I thought is very wise, very interesting. Yeah, and so I think that there's elements there, particularly because we're sharing things that are quite unusual for Christians, just like Wolf was sharing things that were very unusual for Jews. So we can kind of use that to, I had my landlord is a Muslim. And he says, he came out of the room once, what are all these books? Like all these agapes in my room. I said, they're books. They're books about God, showing that God doesn't kill people. And I want to share them to other Christians because many Christians think that God is violent and kills. This Muslim guy was like, huh. Because in his eyes, we believe in the same God, right? It's the God of Jacob, Joseph, and Isaac. And he's like, huh. Why would God need to kill people? I said, I didn't get into a long discussion about it, but just things like that, that just allows, without me, and so I haven't talked to him that much. But I remember he did say to me once, my landlord said, yeah, we believe that Jesus is coming.
Yeah, they do.
We believe that Jesus is second. So.
And many of them are having dreams, which is interesting.
Yes.
So about Jesus' second coming.
Yes.
Converting through dreams.
And the question comes, well, why am I not receiving dreams? And I think the case, how God works, is that if it's a situation where there's nobody to preach the gospel, He will work in other ways that we don't have to be jealous of them or what.
And they're sort of not allowed to read the Bible either.
Yeah, in a lot of places
So
they're not allowed.
you have to give them something that's a bit different as long as the gospel is in it.
And another thing, according to the divine pattern that Wolf does, is Wolf, when he goes into a city, he usually says, who's the religious leaders? Who are the leaders? He talks to the leaders. He doesn't really, and he usually gets these letters of recommendation. So he's not just going into a Muslim city and preaching in the street to the lay people, which would really threaten the leaders. He comes in,
like Jesus did.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on the situation. Yeah, but he makes it clear, he wants to be respectful to their authority.
Yeah.
He goes and he says, this is what I'm here for, this is what I want to do. Is it okay if I go and talk to the Jews? And they ask him questions and he answers. And so like that's it's a longer, that we don't have it printed because it's a bigger book and
It's online.
yeah, it's online and
What's the name of it?
I called it Missionary to the World. That was his nickname. That's what Ellen White calls him, Missionary to the World. And it's half of it is quotes from his journals, and half of it is like my commentary. And I try to put pictures and maps so it doesn't get boring when you're like, where is this place that he is? I try to show some stuff. So, yes.
Danny, before you sit down, why is this relevant to us?
Well, we had to take the message to the world, right? So that he's a missionary to the world, and we mentioned this, that they did it. They were able to preach without the internet, without all these things. They went to the world, and Joseph Wolf, one man, did a lot of that work.
But most Adventists believe that the Pope is about to bring in a Sunday law and it's all finished.
Yeah, so...
We're doing nothing till then.
yes.
And the gospel of the kingdom is first told about the king.
So first we need to understand about the king, and then the gospel of the kingdom
And his
will
kingdom.
be understood, and then we can take it.
Yes.
So receive together.
It's important to me because Ellen White says that prior to 1844 was the greatest religious revival since the time of the apostles. And if you read it, they would go into a town, the whole town would come, listen to the talks, and everybody, there would be prayer meetings or revival for weeks. All the bars would close, no one would buy alcohol. And we're talking major revival, which has not happened. It hasn't happened in our time. And so if it's true that at the end of time it's going to be more than that, that definitely hasn't happened yet. And it's not. It doesn't. And to me, it doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon. And I think that there's many things. Talk about Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. I mean, you go to these countries, they don't know anything. They might know more than we think, and I know God's reached them. But in terms of this great light lightening the world, it's pretty clear to me that it hasn't happened yet. We might tell ourselves that, Adventist World Radio is sharing, but to me that's the fruit is not there compared to the fruit that was there prior to 1844. I mean, just amazing the fact that happened at that time. Atheists, tons of atheists just reading their Bible all day after those, atheist societies, converting, people studying, people just totally stopping drinking and smoking. Even the owners of bars saying that I want to close my bar, forget it. I don't want to have this bar anymore. Things like that. Those things haven't happened.
That was in Wales, apparently, that the policemen had no work to do. The only thing they could do was have a choir.
Yeah.
There was no
crime. The police had nothing to do, so they made a choir.
Well, a bit opposite to Australia. I have a nephew who's a policeman. He said there would be no police force without alcohol. He would not have a job without alcohol.
Yeah. So all these things, I think, are yet to happen, and there's a G.I. Butler quote here, and I think this is really interesting. I found this in a Review and Herald in 1877. G.I. Butler, famously who went against Wagner, but this is 77. He listens to a Sunday missionary telling about their work in Iran, and he says, so these missionaries are working with the Christians in Iran. Okay, they're not working with the Muslims. It says, the great changes in the characters and lives of these Nestorian Christians wrought by means of missionary labor was almost the only avenue to the Mohammedans. These changes astonished them. They began, as in these people, their characters were being changed. Because these were Iranian Christians who didn't really read the Bible anymore, and so these missionaries came and opened the Bible to them. And these Christians were like, wow! And then they stopped drinking, they stopped smoking, and then the Muslims started, what's going on? And then the Muslims saw and became interested. They began to inquire what could be the cause. The Muslims inquired, what could be the cause of these great changes in the Nestorians? And many were led to see it was the Bible with its precious instruction. And thus their confidence was gained, and access to their hearts was obtained. And a few of them were brought to Christ. So, if we were to preach and bars were to close, would people notice? Yes. Yeah, that would be huge. Even my mother, the thing that she most noticed about my whole conversion or religious experience is the fact that I stopped drinking alcohol and eating meat. But the thing that really touched her was stopping alcohol. So, so that's. I hope that this will encourage us, and that we will feel encouraged to share, particularly to people of other cultures. I think Australia is full of foreigners now, so you have plenty of people to share to, and that we can believe that if we can have some success, they will share to their families. It'll go off in a way that we wouldn't even realize until we get to heaven. So yeah, I'll close there. Father in heaven, I just thank you that I have this opportunity to share. You know that I have a passion for some unreached peoples, and that Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims, that they need the gospel, that they need to know that God is loving, that God is there for them, that there is a God that they can ask for help, and that they can pray to, and that you're willing to answer if people just asked, if people just knew. And so we ask for this message to go out, and that you said in the Bible that how blessed are the feet of preachers, and how can the people hear if no one is there to tell? And we know it's up to us. You've given us free will. It's up to us to decide how much we want to share and how much we want to do these things. And so we just ask for more zeal. I hope reading this book, it gave me lots of courage, and I hope that we can have courage and zeal to share and not be scared, and to feel that you're with us. If we do it in the right spirit, without condemning and judging, that people will respond positively. And we just thank you for being with us and sharing with us and helping us to progress in light. We ask that to help us understand all this new light that we're learning. I pray in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Thank you, Danny. I want to say something, but before I do, one of the most precious experiences I've had was when I was with Danny and we were together in Bulgaria, in a gypsy town. It had a Turkish name that was like, fog, because it was the Turks when they were trying to take the Bulgarians. This fog came in and saved the Bulgarians. But we preached to these gypsies for 3 hours on the Begotten Son, and they just loved it. It was one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had, and Danny was there to share it, so that was nice.
And another thing, when we're sharing to outsiders, and we can't expect to control them. We can't expect them to come into our churches. They will do their own thing with the message, and that's okay. So.
Amen. Can we just turn the live stream off? I just have an announcement to make.